The Destroyer's New Year's Eve. Written and narrated by John Mira. Learn more at servingworlds.com. 2.
Tom? Silence on the other end. Claire bunched her shoulders against the cold fear that she'd pushed too hard. Enough shrink talk. What are you doing for New Year's? Do you have family, or... He didn't answer. Still nothing. Tom, I hope I didn't say anything. Wow, look right here, called a hoarse man's voice. Claire whirled around. 2 men, maybe early 20s, wearing garish jackets, one taller, Latino, in an off-kilter baseball cap, the other a black youth, stocky, in a black watch cap. Hey, hi-fi, the taller one whispered in a harsh voice. This pretty lady ain't got no man to please on New Year's Eve. Hi-fi walked around Claire, leering at her and talking across to the other man. She looks tasty. He stepped closer. You tasty? Claire put the phone back in her pocket as Hi-fi brayed crude laughter. She kept her hands in the purse pocket. Eric, she called out, raising her head to the second-story window. There was no Eric, of course, but if either one of them thought there was someone close by, they might call off whatever it was they had. They reacted, but they did not run. The stocky one on her right reached out and punched her hard in the face. She saw stars. The other man rushed in and put a hand around her neck, dragging her back the way they'd come. Come on now. Chigger's ride is parked in the lot at the end. He got a mattress in the back just for you. Claire had her hand out now, reaching behind her. She fired the spray behind her ear, and the one called Chigger screamed, letting go and reaching for his eyes. She followed up with an elbow to his stomach and the flat of her palm under his chin. That put Chigger down. That tasty enough? She panted, already backing between 2 parked cars on the street before Hi-Fi could follow. But he did follow up. She heard the snick of the switchblade, saw it in the white glare of a streetlight as he stepped off the curve, closing on her. Gonna mess you up, bitch, he grinned. After I done fuck, she sprayed the rest of the small can. Hi-Fi yelped and covered his face. She threw the can, and it hit him in the forehead. He growled and charged, but it gave her time to dig in her outer purse pocket once more. Gonna ride you hard into the new year, he growled, head low and charging. She grinned, taser out now. She was going to enjoy this. She heard a scream and a crack. So did Hi-Fi, who turned in surprise. She fired the taser and watched him jerk, only taking her eyes off him when his knees cracked on the pavement under his weight. The other one. She had her taser up again. It would work in touch-stun mode even without the leads. She glanced down, and Hi-Fi wasn't moving. But the other one was. She did a double take. No, he wasn't down. He was floating, dazed and groaning, floating in the air. Just like Miami.
Tisk, tisk, tisk,
she heard him before she saw him. Attempted rape. What would your mother say? Tom walked into the throw of the streetlight, and Claire felt fear. Not for herself, but for the Latino kid. It's all right, Tom, he can't hurt us. Tom's eyes were wide, hateful, boring into the stirring eyes of Chigger. What about the next one, Allie? Claire froze. Allie? Who's... What the hell? Chigger panted, clearly terrified, eyes still swollen shut from the pepper spray. Tom walked closer, spun his hand, and the man spun in the air to face him. He began to struggle, and Tom waved his hands again. Chigger's arms and feet snapped together. Claire heard a bone snap. Chigger screamed. Another wave, and Chigger's mouth shut. A high-pitched wailing moan replaced the scream. Claire walked closer. Let him go. He's learned his lesson. Tom turned and glared. Has he? You think he won't do this again? He whipped back around and walked closer to the kid. I can make sure he doesn't hurt anyone ever again. No, Claire shouted, spinning Tom by the shoulder. Tom stared back, confused. Why do you care? He was going to... Exactly, he was going to hurt me, not you. Let me decide. She waved her arms. You asked why I lived here? Maybe part of it is to remind myself how people are broken, to remind myself what they are up against." Tom tilted his head the other way. He nodded. "They don't have a clue what they're up against." He met her eyes again. "We don't think you're going to save this one." Claire shook her head. "He came to hurt me. I didn't let him." She looked at Chigger. His skin was paling, shock setting in, eyes rolling back in his head. What she could see through the swollen, definitely something broken inside. She remembered Tom's words. He? We? She jerked her head back to Tom. His head was still cocked, face taut with the concentration of an inner battle. "Who are you hearing, Tom?" "The rider," he replied matter-of-factly. "The angry blue light that was meant for you." He chuckled. "He doesn't like it very much in my head." Bob leaned in, the brim of his cap poking into Tom's head just over his ear. "You think the killing makes you a hero? You're what you are 'cause you couldn't stop me when I came for your parents and your sister. Nah, Tommy, I made you into me is all." The filthy hot breath of the phantom Tom had lived with for a decade turned his stomach. The phantom's eyes caught light from the street lamp and seemed to shine. Bob tilted his head. His voice flattened, lost its cockiness, became something cold, cruel, eternal. "You're diseased," it concluded, psychotic, marinating in a survivor's guilt over your parents' death and the decade your sister spent, a decade in a coma. After this, Bob, you make me look like violated her over and over. You need this, don't you? You crave it?" Bob's eyes flashed with blue fire. His lips curled, malicious and petty again. "Go on then, hero. Snap the spick's neck." Claire's eyes widened, listening. She heard every word out of Tom's mouth, in 3 distinctly different voices. Tom wasn't fooled by the rider's lies. He wasn't fooled by Bob's lies. He was scared of his own lies. He knew the rider was right. He was diseased. He knew the ghost of Bob was right. He was a killer. He told himself he was controlling his disease, channeling his kills to help others. Chigger moaned, eyes clamped shut, tears trickling from both eyes. He floated there, arms and legs held tight by Tom's hate. The knuckles of his hand ached as he fought twin desires. Kill, save, kill, save, kill. He began to close his hand. "Tom?" Claire's voice, soft and scared, not scared of Tom, scared for him. "Tom, who's Allie?" Tom froze. He turned to Claire. His eyes, his lips, his cheeks all began to tremble. She was there, standing beside Claire. She was wearing the same clothes Bob had heard her in, but miraculously now they weren't soiled. Just like Allie wasn't soiled by her fate, at least in Tom's mind. She shook her head, smiling. Her love and her hope warmed him inside and out. He dropped his hands. Chigger fell to the ground with a crack. Tom drew in a deep, shaky breath, looking back at Allie and Claire. He shook his head, willing Bob's hot breath to stop warming the back of his neck. A deep, shuddering breath, and he shared the truth with Claire. "Allie is my sister." Claire looked around. Just the one police car remained parked in front of her row house. She rubbed her shoulders through the heavy blanket the ambulance had left her when they'd taken away her attackers. Bones broken, screaming in pain, but alive. The detective pocketed his notebook and digital recorder. "That's it for now. We'll still need you to come in and sign the complaint at the station, but..." The burly man stepped closer and grinned. "Don't worry about the kicks. As far as me and the boys are concerned, those sons of bitches got what they deserved." Claire's brow furrowed. What kicks? The detective laughed, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Exactly. What kicks? But just so you know, you did good. Ruptured both of each asshole's nuts. Their little pricks ain't ever gonna work right again. He tipped his hand to an imaginary hat brim in brutal approval. Good night, Dr. Romer. She stared as his car pulled away. The phone was in her hand. She hit speed dial, walking back to the corner. Thank you, Doctor, Tom said, his voice shaky and weak. Claire reached the corner and looked down the street. She saw the black silhouette of a man behind the wheel in the parked car. I think I'm the one who's supposed to say that, she choked out. You didn't need any help. I saw that. He laughed on the line, his voice thin and reedy. But I didn't stop. An exhausted sigh. I don't know what I needed to do. Claire's mind hadn't stopped working on the mystery of Tom throughout the questions from the first responders, the paramedics, and finally the detectives. He was a challenging puzzle, wrapped in an alien nightmare, but he was not unique. Her other phone buzzed with Amy's ringtone. With a start, she dug it out and saw the message. Going with guy with tattoos. He's got them all over. Your fault. She looked at the time on the bright screen. 11:57. A city bus turned the corner. Its headlights glowed on the parked car. Tom was sitting behind the wheel. His face was wet, but he smiled when he met Claire's eyes. Happy New Year's, Dr. Romer. A fragile smile built on her face. Happy New Year's, Tom. The bus rolled on past. Claire flinched. For a split second, a trick of the light made it seem like someone, shrouded in shadow, sat in the back. Then the bus was past, and only one shape was left in the car. She swallowed hard. What happened to your sister, Tom? There was a heavy silence on the line. Claire tensed, sure the car was going to pull away. Please, Tom, she whispered. It was all too much. Tom dropped the phone to the passenger seat, pressed his hands to the keys in the ignition to turn them, and stopped. She can help me. Run her down, called a voice from the back. Not the foul breath of his personal phantom, Bob, but the cold, commanding tones of the rider. Tom felt the push, like a vise squeezing his spine, his vision blurred. He sighed, more annoyed than frightened after all these months, and pushed back, hard. There was a flare of blue from the back seat. The rider hissed, and the blue light faded, leaving him alone again with his older ghost. I think you ought to run her down too, Tommy boy. Tom looked into the rearview mirror and snarled. Fine, have it your way, pussy, Bob chuckled, and then he faded away too, leaving Tom alone with his fear. He turned the ignition. The engine roared to life. Something moved on the sidewalk near his window. Tom looked. Allie was there. Not Allie as she usually appeared, but Allie as she'd been ever since Bob came to visit. Hair stringy, skin pale, blue hospital pajamas that she hadn't ever moved her own hands to dress in. But she was smiling, hopeful. She held out her hand, beckoning towards him. Okay, Allie, he whispered. When she heard the engine roar to life, Claire started running. She ran flat out like someone's life depended on it. Maybe it did. She was halfway to Tom's car when the door opened and Tom climbed out. Claire walked slowly closer, afraid to breathe, afraid to move too quick, afraid she'd scare him away. What happened to your sister? She whispered. When I was a kid, a man came to our house. I let him in. His name was Bob.
You have been listening to A Destroyer's New Year's Eve, written and narrated by John Miro. Music, Infiltrate This, by Atlas Plug. What Happened in Miami? Learn for yourself on Kindle, Audible, or become a patron at servingworlds.com. Tom and Claire and Bob and the writer will return.